some nations are calling on the United Nations and perhaps other international bodies to engage in something called solar geoengineering. Well, what is that? Solar geoengineering is trying to manipulate the amount of sunlight that comes toward the Earth. Why would anyone want to do that? Well, to stop catastrophic climate change, of course. Why else would you want to do that? A recent vote just happened at the United Nations where nations got together to decide what they think they should do on this particular issue. That's right. The United Nations, well, most people are just living their day-to-day lives, grocery shopping, taking care of the kids. The United Nations is voting on whether they should start looking a little bit more closely into reflecting sunlight back into outer space and away from the planet Earth. What could possibly go wrong with that, right? We have lots of really interesting information on that topic and so much more related to geoengineering in this episode of the Justin Haskins Show. Hello, my name is Justin Haskins. I am a New York Times bestselling author with some guy named Glenn Beck. I mean, who cares about him? Of a book called Dark Future, as well as The Great Reset, Joe Biden and the Rise of 21st Century Fascism. Both books are outstanding. You should check them both out, as well as a columnist at foxnews.com and a whole bunch of other publications. You can read my work. I've been in the conservative fight for quite a while, trying to make the world a freer, better place. And now I have a YouTube channel. I've been involved in a lot of other YouTube channels, but this is the first time that I've actually had a YouTube channel of my own. It's still fairly new. So if you like this content, or if you're interested in helping me out, whether you like the content or not, then please subscribe to the channel. Please like this video. Please leave a comment. All of these things are going to help break through big tech algorithms that are designed to keep content like mine suppressed. So this is going to help people see our content. So please leave a comment, like the video, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. All right, let's get into geoengineering. This is the story of the day for me. I think it's just absolutely incredible how this whole thing played out. What I want to do is I want to show you a series of articles, and then we can talk about geoengineering. But before we get into the articles, the main thing that you need to keep in mind is that this is what we're going to talk about today is solar geoengineering. But geoengineering is the idea that human beings should make dramatic changes to the Earth's atmosphere, to accomplish some greater purpose. And in this particular case, usually, as is usually the case, we're talking about climate change, right? So people who are really concerned about climate change, people who say that climate change is an existential crisis and that all human beings are at risk, that life on Earth is at risk of perishing because of climate change. There's a segment of those people that think that geoengineering is a justifiable tool for stopping catastrophic climate change. Other people, as you're going to find out in this debate, who believe that climate change is catastrophic and an existential threat to humanity, and I don't believe that, by the way, but other people think that it's a really terrible idea and that we shouldn't do it. I think it seems pretty obvious that it's a bad idea, but this is just a really interesting, just incredibly fascinating debate, and it's something that we should all be paying attention to, because if we reach the point in time where governments are seriously, or just some rogue, multi-billionaire seriously starts toying with geoengineering, then all life on Earth is in danger. So we need to be paying attention to these conversations. Even if this isn't something that you're normally very interested in, I would urge you to at least pay attention to geoengineering every once in a while. Maybe Google it or something, or use DuckDuckGo and search for it and see what's going on in the world related to this, because the impacts of this are just absolutely incredible. So geoengineering reached made headlines maybe a week or two ago. Well, it was about a week ago exactly now, from the time that I'm recording this video, because the nation of Switzerland, that's right, the Swiss, known for their neutrality and watches and chocolate, decided that it would be a good idea to explore the possibility of geoengineering. Let's pull up the article. So if you're watching the YouTube version of it, you'll be able to see it up on the screen. The headline of the story: Switzerland calls on UN to explore possibility of solar geoengineering. And I'm just going to read a little bit of the story, not the whole thing. Switzerland has initiated a global debate on whether the, quote, risks, benefits, and uncertainties, unquote, of dimming the sun should be studied by the United Nations expert group. It is proposing that the world body should gather information about ongoing research into solar geoengineering and set up an advisory panel that could suggest future options for the untested and controversial approach to reduce global heating, which would have implications for food supply, biodiversity, global inequality, and security. Also, it might kill everyone and maybe all plants and animals on Earth. Like, this is actually an existential threat, but, we'll get to that later. The Swiss proposal, submitted to the United Nations Environment Assembly that begins next week in Nairobi, that's this week now, in Nairobi, focuses on solar radiation modification. This is a technique that aims to mimic the effect of large volcanic eruptions by filling the atmosphere with sulfur dioxide particles that reflect part of the sun's heat and light back into space. Supporters of the proposal argue that research is necessary to ensure multilateral oversight of emerging planet-altering technologies, which might otherwise be developed and tested in isolation by powerful governments or billionaire individuals. Now, that's going to be a really interesting thing that we're going to have to talk about as this whole thing progresses, right? What is the role of government in all of this? Even if you think that geoengineering is bad, or perhaps especially if you think of geoengineering as bad, should a global government regulate an individual nation or stop an individual nation from pursuing this? Do they have the authority to do that? What about just some rich person like what if Elon Musk decides that he wants to get into geoengineering or something like that? Well, then what do we do about that? Should the world just let Elon Musk do that? Is there nothing that they can do to stop it? What is the role of government in all of this? If you're a limited government person, creates a really interesting problem, doesn't it? Right? So I think that's really interesting. We're gonna move on to the next story here related to all of this. This is from the Union of Concerned Scientists. Now, this group is not a fan of the climate change skepticism. These people are all in on climate alarmism. They believe that we really are facing an existential threat of climate change. There's no doubt about that. Okay, so they're approaching this issue from an angle that's a little bit different than I am. They're talking about geoengineering, but they want to talk about geoengineering from the perspective of the risks that are related to it, the environmental risks and other things. And they think that it's a good idea to do something about climate change, even dramatic wholesale changes of our economy and way of life, which I wouldn't agree with. But they do worry about geoengineering nonetheless, right? So they don't agree with the Swiss, I guess you could say. So let me pull that up as well here. All right, here we go. So what is solar geoengineering? All right, how does it work? What are the risks and why should we study it? So it says here that solar geoengineering refers to proposed approaches to cool the Earth by reflecting solar radiation back to space. The two main approaches being researched are stratospheric aerosol injection and marine cloud brightening. Okay, so those things are exactly as they sound. In one approach, you're literally injecting aerosol into the stratosphere, and that aerosol is going to reflect light and heat back into outer space. The other situation, the other approach would be this marine cloud brightening, basically making clouds so that they reflect more light and heat back up into outer space. It says here, the Union of Concerned Scientists opposes the deployment of solar geoengineering because it poses unacceptably high environmental, social, and geopolitical risks. Instead, UCS supports continued modeling research, observational studies, and strong, inclusive public participation in decision-making, blah, 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 blah. All right, so How exactly does this all work? We talked about stratospheric aerosol injection. We talked about marine cloud brightening. That would use sea salt, by the way, according to the Union of Concerned Scientists. It would use sea salt to stimulate cloud formation over the ocean, which would then help reflect sunlight back into the region. In effect, SAI simulates what happens during large volcanic eruptions when volcanoes emit small particles into the upper atmosphere. We read this before in the other article about what Switzerland wants to do. These particles reflect sunlight and lead to cooling for as long as they remain in the stratosphere, which may be up to a few years after injection. Now that is pretty terrifying. By injecting sulfate or other aerosol particles into the stratosphere, SAI would mimic the cooling effect of large volcanic eruptions, effect of lower SAI would mimic the cooling effect of a large volcanic eruptions effect. Boy, that's a poorly written sentence. Union of Concerned Scientists, get an editor. Of lower global temperatures. If ever deployed, SAI would have global impacts, reducing temperatures and altering precipitation patterns across the planet. Now, that is actually a really, 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 really important point that I want to get at. So much of how the atmosphere, so much of how climatic patterns work, so much of how the world operates is driven entirely by what happens with clouds, by what happens with moisture that's up in the atmosphere. And when you start changing the composition of things up there, which is the whole argument that people who are afraid of CO2 emissions and methane and things like that will make, is that when you start changing the composition of what's occurring in the atmosphere, you have an impact on climate, right? So what Switzerland is arguing is, okay, let's take that same science and let's try to manipulate it to our benefit. Let's try to stop catastrophic climate change by doing the thing that they say, by doing a version of the thing that they say is terrible and is potentially destroying life on Earth. So we're going to do the good version of that, I guess. And don't worry, everybody, we can control it. That would be the argument. But as the Union of Concerned Scientists point out, this when you are putting these aerosols into the atmosphere, it can take years for that to come down, to come out, for the concentration of it to become so low that it isn't having an impact anymore. Which means if you screw this up, it has the potential of killing millions, hundreds of millions, maybe everybody. Because if the way that you would, if you reflect too much light back into space, right? Too much heat back into space, people are going to die. People are going to die because, and this is the dirty little secret that a lot of people who are in the global warming, community don't like to talk about, but global cooling is actually a much bigger threat than global warming. And essentially, historically speaking, you can go back and you can look at the Little Ice Age. You can go back to all sorts of periods, medieval warm period, all of this stuff. When you track human civilization and you track deaths related to colder or warmer climatic changes, mass climatic changes, what you see over and over and over and over and over again is that colder climatic conditions lead to significantly worse outcomes for human beings, plants, animals than warmer changes. The global climate has been much warmer than it is right now, and lots of life existed on Earth. Okay? But when the global climate is cooler than it is now, overall, historically speaking, people, plants, and animals have done a lot worse. So human beings are better off with a warmer global climate. That's just a fact. So if you're going to manipulate, if you're going to say, Well, let's put aerosols into the atmosphere, into the stratosphere. Let's manipulate um, the global temperature, or attempt to manipulate temperatures around the globe by doing this, and you get it wrong, then you run the risk of there being another ice age. It sounds crazy, but that's really what's at risk. And if there's an ice age, millions of people will probably die, maybe hundreds of millions. Lots of people will die in the midst of an ice age. Ice ages historically terrible. So it doesn't sound to me like the risks outweigh the potential rewards of stopping global warming. It seems to me like global cooling is a bigger threat than global warming, and so man-caused global cooling might be they would say that maybe if we study it enough, we could get the risk down, and we could make it so that it's likely that we don't have a catastrophic problem from it, and actually we reflect just enough light and heat back into space that everything will be fine. But do you really want to take that chance? Because you could kill everybody. It's not an exaggeration. Like literally you could kill everybody if you don't get this right. So Switzerland brought this forward at this United Nations Assembly. The idea here is to get the ball rolling on studying specific proposals, methods, ways that we could go about doing this, etc. Now, what ended up happening? What ended up coming from all of that? Well, the Swiss didn't exactly have a very good day. They didn't exactly have a very good day when it came to their proposal. For the most part, I think you could say pretty fairly that it was soundly rejected. All right. This is from Euronews.com, published on February 29th, 2024. Sun blocking technologies, a no-go for now after UN countries voice serious concerns. Now, the reason I want to bring this story up is because this specific story is because some of the concerns in here I think are really important that we mentioned this. It's insane that anyone at the United Nations thought that this would be a good idea. Okay. But here it says, Switzerland's attempt to explore the possibility of dimming the sun has been dismissed by a United Nations summit this week. Solar geoengineering will go no further after a debate at the UN Environment Assembly in Kenya failed to reach a consensus on this issue last night. Switzerland had suggested creating a UN expert group to study the risks and opportunities of solar radiation modification, a controversial set of technologies aimed at cooling the Earth. They ended up withdrawing the resolution because there was, quote, strong opposition from other nations. What is the problem here? Okay. It says here, we can scroll down a little bit into the article. Releasing a report on the state of SRM, that's the solar modification, research last year, the United Nations Environment Program said that it was, quote, deeply concerned about the lack of empirical knowledge on the potential risk, impacts, and unintended consequences related to doing solar engineering, geoengineering. One worrying scenario is a rogue state or billionaire deciding to give it a go without the backing of the international community. Some people feel that even contemplating SRM research could flare up geopolitical tensions. I think that's also a really interesting point. Even talking about it could lead to people making some pretty dramatic decisions, right? What happens if you get a country that says, we have to do something about climate change, we're all going to die. And they say the rest of the world isn't going to do it, but we are. So they send something up into space with the idea that they're going to inject aerosols into the stratosphere in order to avert a climate change catastrophe. And the rest of the world is watching and saying, oh my God, they might kill everybody if they do this right, and we don't trust them. And we told them not to do it, and they're doing it anyway. What do? Do you shoot this thing out of the sky that's being sent up into the atmosphere? Do you have a war that breaks out over this? What about a billionaire, right? What about just an Elon Musk type character? What if he decides that he wants to do it? And to my knowledge, he doesn't want to do this, by the way. But what if he just changes his mind, decides that he does? How are people going to deal with that? Creates all kinds of really interesting questions. Others argue that investing in the technical fix will take the pressure off governments and fossil fuel companies to decarbonize. That, I think, is actually the main reason why. This is one of the reasons I wanted to bring up the story. That I think is one of the main reasons why there are a lot of people, even on the left, on the crazy environmental left, that say, yeah, this is probably not a very good idea. I think it's maybe they would be open to it, but they don't want to bail on this whole global Green New Deal, European Green New Deal, everybody drives electric cars, dream fantasy thing that they've had for a long time. They don't want to bail on that. They don't want to bail on that. So if they have a fix that doesn't involve that, meaning geoengineering, well, then that would take pressure off of fossil fuel companies and governments to fix the problem through the Green New Deal type stuff. I think that's really interesting. One thing we need to be crystal clear about, says the United Nations Environmental Program Chief Scientist Andrea Hinwood, is that SRM technologies are not a solution to the climate crisis. They do not reduce greenhouse gas emissions, nor could they reverse the impacts of climate change, she has explained. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Obviously, it theoretically could deal with the impacts of climate change. Ocean acidification, if it worked correctly, the dangers are the issues. Ocean acidification, sea level rise, increasingly extreme weather, pollution, and other issues will all continue unless they are tackled at some point. I don't believe that we are seeing these things at an increasingly higher rate as a result of CO2 emissions or methane emissions. I just don't think that's what the best evidence shows that. And I'll have to save my best evidence for another video, but I just don't buy that. It says here, there are also concerns about the impact of SRM on food supply and biodiversity, and what would happen if stratospheric aerosol injection suddenly stopped in the future, releasing the previously cloaked impacts of warming. That's really interesting too. What if global warming is catastrophic and you put all this aerosol up in the atmosphere and then the aerosol goes away and we decide not to put more aerosol in the atmosphere? Would that lead to a sudden rapid increase in warming? Very interesting question. So then it says, should we be talking about solar geoengineering? ? Perhaps the most relevant part of the solar geoengineering debate for now is whether we should be talking about it at all. Critics have likened it to opening a Pandora's box of irreversible trouble and say setting up an expert group on the subject could undermine the de facto moratorium on geoengineering. The vocal opposition to geoengineering at UNEA 6 sends a powerful message underscoring a broad commitment to upholding established norms of international environmental law, says Mary Church, senior geoengineering campaigner at the Center for International Environmental Law. Solar radiation modification technologies are dangerous and do not have any role to play in our common future, she reaffirmed in response to the news from Nairobi. However, and this is, I think, a little worrisome. So it sounds like, okay, the crazy Swiss, they're out there saying, maybe we should look into this whole geoengineering thing. That could be fun. And everyone else is like, you might kill us if we do that. I don't know if that's a good idea. Let's not do it. But the United Nations isn't exactly saying this is never going to happen. It's just saying, for now, let's not, go there. But it isn't killing the idea entirely, which is really incredible. It says here, UNEP appears more even-handed, meaning they're not as opposed to it. Since SRM research has been underway for decades, Dr. Hinwood said, it is naive to think research will cease and the issues will disappear. We cannot afford to bury our heads in the sand. Well, that's interesting. So what the United Nations is saying is, yeah, I mean, we're not going to do this, but we're going to keep studying it in case someday we decide we do want to do it. Well, I'm glad they're not going full bore into it, but I am more than just a little bit troubled by all of this, because I don't know. It seems to me that we are potentially creating conditions for absolute catastrophe. I don't know why we would want to research something that could potentially kill hundreds of millions or even more than 1 billion people if it goes wrong. I don't know why we would want to do that. That doesn't really seem to make a whole lot of sense to me. And yet that is exactly what is going on with some of these folks. They want to keep researching it. The United Nations says, yeah, we're still going to keep looking into it. We're not going to say that it's going to go away forever. There's going to be people, scientists out there still affiliated with it. We're still going to keep track of it. We're still going to watch and wait and see. And, maybe, probably not, but maybe. Well, that to me is nuts. Absolutely, positively nuts. All right, this from Reuters. This is the last article. I just want to read this one part of the Reuters story. What are critics of SRM worried about? This came from an article that was published in November of 2023, last November. Can solar and geoengineering stop global warming? It's an explainer. All right, so it says, what are critics of SRM worried about? Dozens of scientists are calling for a comprehensive international assessment into the use of SRM in order to understand the risks involved and the regulations that might be required to deploy the technologies on a wider scale. They said in a letter published in February that it was unlikely that carbon emissions could be reduced or removed quickly enough to keep temperature increases below 2 degrees Celsius, and that SRM interventions could be made available when necessary to avert climate tipping points. That's the thing that really, really disturbs me, right? Is, are we going to reach a point if they don't get what they want, if climate alarmists don't get what they want, they keep banging their head against the wall and they're not getting the big sweeping Green New Deal like plans that they've been looking for, are they at some point going to say, you know what, screw all that, we're still going to try it, but that's not our main focus anymore. Instead, we're going to try to control the sunlight. Like, is that the plan? We're going to try to control sunlight, because we've just reached this point where we have to do it. It seems like there are a growing number of people in the environmental left and international communities, etc., that are saying that this is a possibility. But read what it says here. Opponents of the method say that while the injection of sulfate aerosols might cool the planet, the side effects could prove even more destructive. One group of 60 scientists launched a global initiative last year aimed at persuading governments to ban outdoor solar geoengineering experiments, because there are plenty of them going on right now. The group warned that the risks of SRM were too great and that it could impact weather patterns, agriculture, and, quote, the provision of basic needs of food and water. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Why is anyone being allowed to pursue this kind of research? It's just absolutely insane. Critics point to models that show SRM could disrupt monsoons and cause droughts in Africa and Asia. It could also cause droughts everywhere. Others say it could also slow the recovery of the ozone layer or lead to a dangerous spike in acid rain. Oh, nothing to worry about though, right? Let's just keep running those outdoor experiments. We wouldn't want to stick our heads in the sand, right? The United Nations? The technology could even be weaponized by, quote, rogue states or unscrupulous private companies and create new geopolitical and security threats, the United Nations Environment Program warned in a report published this year. That, to me, is astounding. So on the one hand, the United Nations, to their credit, is saying this is probably not a good idea. There are a lot of nations saying, we don't even want you to vote on it because this is such a bad idea. Like, this is not a good idea. You got a bunch of scientists out there, like the Union of Concerned Scientists, say, yes, climate change is catastrophic, but geoengineering is really bad. You got some opponents of geoengineering saying, if you go down this road, you might cause monsoons and continental droughts that lots of people could die. Wars might even break out. And yet there's still all these people on the environmental left that are saying, we're going to go forward with it anyway. And the United Nations, some of their key people are saying, well, we're going to keep studying it and looking at it and testing it. And people are going to keep and maybe we won't set up a panel to do like in-depth research, and maybe we won't actually do it, but people are going to keep researching it. We can't keep our heads stuck in the sand. It seems like sticking your head in the sand on this one is a good idea. That, I don't know. I don't know. This is madness. This is absolutely madness. Madness. And all because of what? All because there is this idea that if we don't do this, we're all going to die from climate change. That climate change is catastrophic, even though even though research has consistently shown over and over and over again that we are not seeing dramatic increases in hurricanes, that we're not seeing dramatic increases in wildfires, that we're not, compared to 100 years ago, that we're not seeing dramatic increases in people dying from starvation or anything like that relative to the growing size of the population, that we're not seeing seas swallowing up whole cities like they said was going to happen 30 years ago or whatever. Like, we're not seeing a lot of the things, the dire warnings that had been predicted. We're not seeing them. Instead, what we're told repeatedly is that, well, you may not be seeing them now, but you will see them in the future. They're coming. They're coming for us. The climate models, they tell us that we're all going to, this is an existential threat, and you have to listen to the climate models. That's what you have to do. Interesting. A new report recently came out from the Heritage Foundation. And I'm not going to go into the details of the report, but I just want you to take a look at it. And I will try to remember to put this in the show notes as well, so you can check it out if you're interested. Okay. The report was done by Roy Spencer, Dr. Roy Spencer. He's a visiting fellow in the Heritage Foundation Center for Energy, Climate, and the Environment. Brilliant guy. Been involved in the climate change debate for a long time. Has had lots of connections to my employer, the Heartland Institute, and so done a lot of incredible work over the years. Incredibly well-qualified person. He did this really remarkable report for the Heritage Foundation, published in January. The summary of it is this: warming of the global climate system over the past half century has averaged 43% less than that produced by computerized climate models used to promote changes in energy policy. In the United States during the summer, the observed warming is much weaker than that produced by all 36 climate models surveyed here. What the cause of this relatively benign warming could theoretically be entirely due to humans' production of carbon dioxide from fossil fuel burning, this claim cannot be demonstrated through science. At least some of the measured warming could be natural. Contrary to media reports and environmental organizations' press releases, global warming offers no justification for carbon-based regulation. So the real takeaway that I want you to get from this, whether you believe that climate change is an absolute, is a massive problem or not, what you have to understand is this: what science tells us is that the predictions of catastrophic climate change that's always going to happen 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years off into the future. This is what we're always being told. It's not happening now. Anyone who tells you it's happening now is not being honest with you. If you look at the data, you can see very clearly that you can look at weather events, you can look at crop yields, you can look at all kinds of different data points, and you'll see things are not getting substantially worse. In fact, life on Earth is getting substantially better. Okay? But what they always tell you is that they've got these climate models, these advanced computerized climate models that tell them that in the future, if things keep going the way they're going now, in the near future, we're all going to be in huge trouble from climate change. What you have to understand is, and that's why this study by Roy Spencer is so important over at the Heritage Foundation. What you have to understand is that the climate models are have all the climate models that we have, where we can go back and look at climate models from, say, 30 years ago and say, how good were they at predicting what's happening right now? All the climate models, or the vast majority of them, over-predicted. They overestimated the warming that was going to happen in the future. They overestimated it. This study shows it was 43% less. Okay? That the warming was 43% less than what had been predicted by climate models. Okay? And that the observed warming in the summer in the United States, much less, much weaker than that produced by all 36 climate models surveyed here. So the rate of global warming is not anywhere near as bad as what the climate models have continuously showed. Now, how do you know that the climate model that comes out today, predicting 30 years into the future, isn't more accurate than the climate models that came out 30 years ago predicting right now? And the answer is, you have to be a climate scientist to know that. You have to look into the details of it and understand these things. But you, as just a regular person, I think it's fair for you to look at the track record of these people and say, look, maybe climate change is a problem. Maybe you're right and these climate models are right, but you have to prove to me that you are good at that your predictions are going to be accurate. If you keep telling me the sky is falling and then the sky doesn't fall, at some point I have to stop believing you. And more importantly, if you're telling me the sky is falling and the only way to fix it is to give you, the government, or some cabal of international organizations or whatever, power over significant swaths of the global economy, then I'm going to be even more skeptical of the claims you're making. You should have to prove that your track record is evidence that you know what you're talking about. And unfortunately, when it comes to the climate science establishment, that just simply isn't the case. The evidence shows that they've been over predicting warming and making dire predictions about climate change and other environmental issues for decades and decades and decades and decades and decades. At some point in the future, I might do a whole video just on failed predictions, environmental predictions, because it's unbelievable how many there are. Hundreds. So-called experts from Stanford University and Harvard and others saying everything's going to be terrible. And then it isn't. Al Gore, An Inconvenient Truth, that incredible documentary that he did decades ago now, almost everything that he predicted in that didn't happen. It didn't happen. They keep making predictions that don't come true. And maybe the predictions they make now, maybe they will come true. I don't know. I'm not a climatologist. I'm very suspicious, though, because their track record has been so bad. So what does this have to do with solar geoengineering? Well, what it has to do with solar geoengineering is there is a growing movement of people who are willing to consider something that might actually kill us all in order to stop something that the evidence shows has not become a problem for humanity. In fact, I think the best evidence shows that global warming has actually made things a little bit better. Maybe in the future it'll make it worse, but I think global warming has made things better. We have a greener planet today than we did in the 1970s, for example. That's because of global warming. All right. Now, is global warming being caused by human beings? To what extent is global warming being caused by human beings? Is global warming going to reach the point where it's completely out of control and maybe it does become a huge problem, maybe even catastrophic? These are all really important questions that we should be concerned about, and we should take the best evidence that we can find and really take these issues seriously. But in the meantime, when the so-called experts are continuously getting their predictions wrong, we have to stand strong against any kind of attempt to do something as dramatic as geoengineering. Because if we don't, we might end up in worse trouble than we ever imagined in order to stop something that isn't even really a problem. Or maybe it's a problem, but not as big of a problem as the one we're about to create. So, where's the Biden administration? I don't even know. But I think this is actually a big issue. I would love to see the Biden administration, maybe they're opposed to geoengineering. I honestly don't know. But if they are, they should be strongly opposed to it. They should be out there telling the world, this is so dangerous. We shouldn't be going anywhere near this because it's that bad. It's that big of a potential catastrophe. All right, that's it for today's episode. A little bit different of topic than what I normally cover, but I just think this is wildly interesting stuff. There's so many different layers and elements to it. So thank you for indulging me as we kind of veered off into some environmental climate change type topics and talked about geoengineering. Thank you again for watching the show. Please leave a comment, like the video, leave a a review on Apple Podcasts. That would be incredibly helpful as well. And until next time, my name is Justin Haskins. Please stay free. And don't buy into solar geoengineering. That's a terrible idea. Just terrible.